And all of a sudden, parts of the industry changed because of that. Certainly providing tests, test cycle products is a big part of what testing as a service does. The testing competition yesterday looked at things like architecture and test design and test specifications and test procedures, the kinds of things that get talked about in ISTQB, and we'll mention ISO standards here in a bit. Those are all nice things to have, but if they don't have the good engineering, the good test engineering underneath them, they're not as useful as if you've got good testing going on. And it's hard to do good testing. I'm still figuring out how to do this. And so testing as a service, pretty good business going on out there and growing. I put this in here because people a lot of times aren't sure what outsourcing is and how it works. And I'm not going to read everything on here, but you got to have a plan. Like you do in testing, you have to have a plan. You have to define and market a strategy. Are you going to do IV&V? Are you going to do testing as a service? Is it going to be testing as a service inside of Malaysia? And there are companies that have independent test groups inside of the company. And where I used to work, a big company, we had test groups that were inside of the project, test groups that were inside of the company but outside of the project. And then we had a few cases for certain kinds of very specialized important software where we had an internal IV&V group, and then in a few cases we had some external. I'll talk about the external. You got to highlight the services and advantages. We're going to talk about that after we come back from break, and how to market and return on investment. You have to obtain a contract. Now this is the boring part. I'm bad at contracts. I don't know too many people that are high technical geeks that also like doing contracts. But you got to have a contract to kind of protect yourself. You got to understand cost and schedule. I was hired not too long ago by a company that was looking to improve their testing. They were moving into the Internet of Things. They had been an electronic company and doing music kind of stuff, but they knew everything is going to streaming and hooked into the Wi-Fi, those kinds of things. And they were like, how do we get into the software stuff? And how do we test that kind of stuff? I came in to help them. And one of their big questions was they had no idea how to estimate the costs and the schedules of the thing. And their senior management was asking their people, and their people said, we don't know, hire somebody to come in, which is what I was doing. Then you got to go off and perform the work, manage, and then you can continue on that cycle. And there's companies that are good at the outsourcing testing market, companies not so good. And you can be on the side that outsources your testing. You can be a company that provides the outsourcing on these things. But those are the kinds of things when we talk about outsourcing that are going on there. I mentioned the crowd testing. Provide some group testing, typically paid by the bug. I know a few people, it's a good way to practice and earn a little bit of money on the side. Something to do in the evenings and weekends is provide that. And I mentioned the two companies, U-Test Clause and Mob for Hire. I would think that they would be interested in Malaysian testers, largely because of there's a portion, one of the pieces of information is internationalization. And we do it in English, and then we want to translate it into Chinese and Japanese and the native Malay tongue and all these other languages. Well, I'm good at basic testing, but I'm not very good at those international things. So we want testers that are bilingual, that speak those languages and go, no, you just called somebody in Malaysia a sticky fish face person, which you probably don't want to do. You probably don't want to insult somebody. But when you do just a basic, stupid translation, that's the kind of thing that happens. Testers can come along and do that. And this could produce something that I've been advocating a little bit here for you all. What in the US we used to call a cottage industry, meaning something that you don't need a big office to do. You can do it at home. And we're seeing this in a few places around the world where people are just doing some of the test activities kind of at home. I know a couple ladies that are raising families, but they do testing kind of when the baby's asleep, which sometimes is a lot and sometimes not a lot, depending upon the baby and things like that. But you can have a test cottage industry around to do that gets people working so that, then when the baby goes to grade school, you can go back into the industry. If that's what you want. I'm not saying you have to, but a lot of us like the extra income, right, on those kinds of things. So, the possibility there for crowdsourcing, independence in testing. Back when, I guess it was probably the first 5 or 10 years when I was in testing, particularly Boris Weiser and a few others advocated that testing has to be done independent of developers. Anybody know why we would say something like that? Any guesses? It deals with a phenomenon, you all suffer it too. It's known as bias, a blind spot. And when you work with a developer, and if you've worked as a developer, I know I've had this happen, where you know there's a bug in the software. I mean, you can see it happening, but you cannot find that bug. Okay? And I've personally had this happen where I'm looking at my code and going, I don't see it, and I showed it to you, and you go, are you blind? The bug is right there. Okay? It's called a blind spot. It's a psychological phenomenon. Everybody has it. You all know you have a blind spot. And I was like, can I fly the airplane? They went, no. That's like the 3rd or 4th time I've been in one of those modeling simulators and they haven't let me play it. I think they're afraid of it. Probably true. So, very common kind of approach on that stuff. We had these multiple levels. We had the scientific tools that were doing this modeling and simulation. We had design-based simulations. We had these hardware things, all running separate. You'd bring them together, you'd do multiple levels of compare of this data. Remember, I kept saying testing is about data. One place I worked, in one test cycle, we would generate between 2 and 4 terabytes worth of data. That's a lot of data. I used to think it was a lot until I started running into some of these other companies doing this IV&V, and they said, oh, we'll generate between 8 and 10 terabytes of data during one test. Now, a terabyte, I don't know how to get my mind around how many zeros and ones it is. You have to use analysis tools, other tools, to go through and divide that data. Remember I was talking about the test tools that would kind of automatically make suggestions on testing? Well, we had tools that would take the test results and go through and scan it, post-process it, put it in a form of these terabytes worth of data that a human. We had requirements that dealt with orbit conditions and a bunch of fancy names that you don't need to understand. And we had hardware characteristics. And this is where V&V gets a little bit different than just pure software testing. And it relates particularly to the Internet of Things, because we had to worry in our testing not just about the software, but the software that the computer was running on, what the computer was interfaced to, and the hardware. And even worse, the environment of things. And so we had to fly from here in Florida out and around. As I said, I was a rocket scientist. My favorite things, I've sent satellites to the now 8 planets, including Pluto, the one that just flew by Pluto. Remember that a few weeks back? Actually, it was the day of my birthday. I worked that mission 9 years before. That was my last major mission. Took it 9 years to get there. I wasn't sure I was going to live that long. And it was kind of cool because the day before my birthday it flew by, and the day of my birthday they started downloading all the pictures from Pluto. So I was like, well, that's kind of a cool birthday present. But those missions to the planets, that was cool stuff for me. You know, didn't make me Bill Gates, but you know, it's cool story time on those things. So, and we had software, and we had code, and we had documentation, and it all had to work. Because I think that Pluto mission was something like $2 billion total in that to get there, and probably won't get there in any of our lifetimes, but some cool data coming back from it. More to come on that. We had 3 tenets for what we did. We had verification. This is the software side, what some of you might call checking of the requirements, confirmation of the requirements. We had to do that. Okay, and the requirements were in great detail on things. We did low-level white box, those of you in ISTQB, code coverage, where every single line of code had to be tested, the decision points had to be tested, the branches had to be tested, everything had to be tested. The requirements to the code and over the whole life cycle. We did something else called scientific validation. This is kind of a cool one. The people at Airbus, the Japanese peer were kind of interested in this. There's terms called modeling and simulation, and we had extensive models and simulations, huge models and simulations. The test labs I ran, I'll show you a picture of here in a moment. Anybody know the term keyword testing? Something you might want to look at. Keyword testing is a form of supports automation, but also just manual testing. We were doing keyword testing before the term keyword testing invented. It was data-driven keyword testing, where basically we could program up a test, and the test would run for hours, a half day, just in an automated fashion. But the problem happened, and management said, why didn't we see this in all the thousands of tests you guys ran, all this massive amount of data? So it wasn't me, fortunately. There's an advantage sometimes to being a test manager. But I selected a couple of unfortunate engineers, and I said, go through all the data again, look for this. Out of the 1,000, 1,200, something like that tests, we found 3 tests that the problem had happened, but we missed the bad data. Okay? We missed the data in amongst the data. Management didn't react well to that. They were like, so you told us before everything was good, then you tell us now things aren't good. We want you to go back through all the data. Those few engineers that got to do that, I think were happy when I moved on, because they spent about 3 or 4 months sorting through all the data to make sure we hadn't missed anything else. So test data is nice, but if there's too much of it, you got to figure out how to analyze those kinds of things. We need that kind of way to parse the data. We're your developers. We got better over time and became kind of good friends with them. But you know, you have some good relationships, and you know, check those requirements. But requirements aren't the only things. Do ongoing planning. And by the way, that plan document is important to produce, but the planning is the more important thing. You've got to constantly change with the plan as it comes and goes. Don't get too hung up by the plan not being followed. Planning is an ongoing activity. Places I worked, when we were really on the critical path of testing, we did daily planning. A little trick here out of the Agile world. We did daily planning stand-up meetings. When I say stand up, I made my test team stand up. Anybody know why we did that? Pardon me?
They're running out of time.
Well, we kept the meeting short, because you're all happy to sit here, you know, but if you're all standing, about 5 or 10 minutes, you're like, okay, the meeting's over now. You know, anybody feel like you spend too much time in meetings? So if you're standing up, the meeting goes short, and you're in and out. True story. My team really wanted to sit down. First few times said, no, we want the meeting to go short. And after a while, they were like, okay, we're going to stand up and we're out of here. That's what I wanted. You know, work on the communication. Another story. I had a tester. You probably know some of these. This tester had the unique ability to make developers angry instantly. He would write up problem reports or emails, and the developers would storm into my office. And I'm like, I went to him, I said, Kurt, before you send anything out, send it to me first. And I would tone it down and things like that. Same information, just, you know, and then I would send it out, and developers were much happier on things. So we worked on the communication with that. Because you want happy people in the workplace. Happy is good. Another trick, you want people to come to your meetings, like at lunchtime, buy them lunch. And I know Malaysians, you love your food, right? Lots of good food out there. Which, where are we doing on break time? We're coming up on break here pretty quick.